Oh my god, the craziness continues with chapter 339. Ego slams Karasu. Hyuga foresees everything that Blue Lock is trying to do, and we get a superhero landing out of nowhere. This chapter has to be one of my favorites. It's honestly one of the best non-football chapters in the entirety of the show. And I mean, to be honest, this is to be expected since this is the biggest game in Blue Lock yet. And so the writer is pulling out all the stops for it. However, and as always, let's start from the top. But before we do, actually, I gotta say that there is a storm raging outside, and so if you hear any thunder rumbling in the background, just know it is out of my hands. But with that out of the way, let's start with the first panel, which features such a cool shot from the back of Isagi, where he is sitting on the bench and his jersey is laying next to him. And what's interesting, it seems that Isagi is focused on Karasu. He seems to be observing him very closely, and judging by how things went and the civil war between these two, this is to be expected. But more importantly, the chapter starts with the following statement. Japan has felt the true strength of the U20 World Cup's favorite to win. To determine their tactics for the second half, they exchange opinions. And so the next panel immediately picks up with said opinions as we have a conversation between Aiku, Bachira and Ryo. There, Aiku is the first to comment and he says, "Man, they're tough. This is France, they're ranked number 1 in the world for you. And hey, Hyuga is also insane." There, Bachira in a very genius-like says, "Hey, it's still a 1-point difference, right? We can still make adjustments in the second half and we can still do this." And guys, this is very ironic for Bachira because adjustments will be made and Bachira might end up suffering because of them. But then Ryo jumps in and he asks, "Adjust? How exactly are we going to do that?" And Bachira again, in a very genius-like manner, responds with the following. "We built this team centered around Isagi, didn't we? We just stick with that and try something different." And once more, Ryo tries to put some logic into the conversation and he tells him again, and this time I feel like the tone is a little bit harsher. "I am telling you, that strategy has fallen apart. We can't keep sticking to it." And again, the genius in Bachira says, "No way, it can still work." And here you can feel Ryo getting agitated because he tells him, "No, if we stay like this, we are just going to get crushed and it will be all over. We can't do this no more." And I gotta say something about Bachira. He seems to be friendly and very easygoing, but he has to be one of the purest geniuses in the show. He doesn't care about logic, he doesn't care about what must be done. He just wants to have fun and he just wants to do what he likes. And in this case, obviously, is playing next to Rin and Isagi. However, Ryo, on the other hand, being a very strong, talented learner, is actually trying to look at this very logically. And I gotta say, I am very impressed by Ryo's maturity, because as you all know, I've always said before that he has one of the best weapons in the show, yet he is wasting his talent. However, it seems that losing Nagi really changed him and made him far more mature and far more rational, which obviously is always a great sight to see. I feel like only the purest of geniuses could be illogical. The rest of the players need a certain amount of logic in order for them to perform. And Ryo's mentality here is just perfect. He's not emotional, he doesn't care about what Isagi might feel, he just cares about winning and he cares about crushing France. And mind you, that's the correct way in the eyes of Ego. However, and since I brought Isagi's feelings into this, you gotta factor in the shit he must be going through right now, especially because he is right next to them, and he must see it clearly now that the moment he rose to be the number 1 in Blue Lock, everything came falling apart. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, because if you remember, this is exactly what Kazur went through in the NEL. When Blue Lock joined Bastard Munich, there was a shift in the power dynamics and Kazur suffered a lot. But as I said, this is not necessarily bad because it means that Isagi can grow from this. It might be easier to climb to the number 1 spot, but it might be very hard to stay on top. And if Isagi understands this specifically, I am not worried for him. He will surely come back stronger. And as we will see later in the chapter, he actually does. However, as Isagi was thinking to himself how his whole system crumbled, of course it was Karasu who jumps into the conversation and he tells them, "Calm down, you lot. Just like Hiyori's goal, we are going to invent a new pattern. I'll take over this team's second best in Isagi's place. Let's go with that for the second half." And in all honesty, the moment Karasu said this, I immediately knew Ego would say something. Like, this goes entirely against what Ego was teaching them. And so when Karasu said this, I knew Ego will intervene and give him a lesson. And that's exactly what he did, because he tells him, "Watch your mouth, Karasu. Are you trying to kill Blue Lock?" However, this did not budge Karasu whatsoever. He just turned and looked at Ego as calm and collected as ever, because in his mind he will scold Ego the same way he did to Isagi. Because he scolded the child Isagi, he thought he could beat the father, which is Ego. However, Ego is completely different. He tells him, "I'll give you credit for your quick-witted change in play, but the problem is your mentality. From the middle of the first half, your plays looked as if you've given up on your own goal. Exactly what are you trying to achieve? Answer me." And then Karasu responds, "Because I thought it would be better for the team." And Ego immediately jumps in. "I am pretty sure I taught you that anyone who fights for the team is absolute trash. You need to fight for yourself. I mean, in the first place, if every footballer fulfilled their aptitude in the right position for the right job, ultimately it would result in nothing more than a contest of physical abilities and tactics. This is exactly why back in the NEL, Noah's system could not account for players like Hiyori and Isagi because they present weapons that could not be measured physically. Oh wait, this could explain the point system that Noah was following and why it fell apart towards the end of the NEL, because players with higher numbers were not performing as players with lower numbers. I gotta say this is very interesting. I feel like I thought Ego might be wrong here, but he is talking specifically about France. He's not talking in general. Oh, I actually like this. But let's actually carry on with what Ego is saying, and I'll get back to that later. The country of France has an environment well equipped to accept diverse ethnicities and cultures. The vast diversity of talent born there creates endless options for their football, making it easy for the right kind of talent to emerge in any given position. However, if France creates a superior team by strictly selecting talent based on their aptitude, is there any chance for Japan to win by doing the exact same thing? The answer is no. Things like live according to your aptitude, or be happy within your means, or hell, everyone can be happy if they live according to their aptitudes, is simply a theory used by the strong to paralyze the thinking of the weak and control their potential. We are the weak. You cannot change the world by living according to your aptitude. However, again, I gotta say, this is not what Hugo was saying. Hugo is saying that you can reach farther in life by staying true to your aptitude. I doubt he was saying that everything must be suitable in order for it to work. He was just saying that by giving up to your suitable destiny, you are meant to reach farther. And I get it, Ego here might not be just speaking about Hugo and might be actually speaking about the French philosophy, because it seems to be that way with Noah. However, I gotta give Ego his credit, because he is saying something very correct here, and it is kind of a counterpart to Hugo, despite the latter not actually living by what Ego is saying right here. You see, what about if someone is more suitable for your position? Would you just give up on that? Would you just go for another thing? Because it kind of seemed that way with Hugo. I don't know, in this point specifically, Ego is absolutely correct. You can never know by just looking at someone's aptitude. You can never know what they have inside of their brains, and you can never know their hidden talent. This is exactly why Noah's point system did not work on the likes of Isagi and Hiyori, who were actually placed as low as Igaguri. But in fact, they were better than players like Yuki and Kunigami, who were at the top. In any case, as I said, I am kinda split here, because from one perspective, Hugo makes so much sense. I mean, the best way to reach the best version of yourself is by living in suitability, by doing things in your strong points. However, at the same time, the counter-argument Ego is presenting makes so much sense as well. And this is not a problem, by the way, guys. Two ideologies could clash, and they both could be correct, and both could be very good for humanity. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that one is better than the other. And I feel like Ego saying that what Hugo is talking about works for France confirms exactly this. However, let's carry on with the chapter, because I feel like I should make a video on this specifically, on the clash of ideologies between Ego and Isagi against Karasu, Noah and Hugo. In any case, Ego says, "That's precisely why I said everyone must be a striker. This philosophy that completely ignores aptitude is at the heart of Blue Lock. Imagine this with me. If you had 100 lives to live, how many times do you think you could become the world's #1 striker? Even if I were to estimate it as optimistically as possible and as miraculously high as possible. The answer is just one time. You could only do it one time. Sometimes that never would happen if you are living within your means, living for the sake of that one single chance. That's what it means to be an egoist, doesn't it?" And immediately I gotta say, Hugo sounds much better than Ego right now. Sure, he is saying all of this and it sounds very good, but what about the players you put on defense? What about Gagaman? Gagamaru? Do you still expect him to be the #1 striker even when he is a goalkeeper? Come on, this is a little bit hypocritical from Ego. And I feel like judging by the fact that Kira is saying it is brainwashing, and how Snuffy said that Noah and Ego had a nasty relationship, and then Hugo adding to the fact that it is brainwashing, I feel like there must be a dark side to this. And I don't know about you guys, but Blue Lock does not make mistakes. Now I'm not saying that Ego is entirely wrong, but at the same time he is not entirely correct. As I said, players like Karasu, Nico, Aiko and Gagamaru have already given up on becoming strikers. They cannot possibly do it from the positions Ego himself put them in. And so I don't know, it seems that he is applying natural selection while telling them all to go suicidal. Like, I understand his talk about aptitude earlier and how Japan cannot stand to fight against France in that point, but at the same time this feels a little bit hypocritical from Ego. What do you guys think? I am always fascinated about your explanations and your theories, and so I am really curious, what do you think about this point specifically? Because right now I am torn and I am leaning towards Hugo here. Like, Hugo makes so much more sense than this. And please, if you defend Ego here, explain to me how this would work with the likes of Karasu, Nico and Gagamaru. Because even though Karasu mentioned that, they seem to be ignoring that point entirely. And also you have to remember, Ego himself is a failure. And I'm not saying this to attack him, I'm saying that there might be a reason why he failed, and Isagi might end up actually adapting a mentality that is a fusion between Hugo and Ego's philosophies. And honestly, this is just exciting because I don't know where things are going and I truly can't wait to see. However, let's carry on with the chapter, because as Isagi was getting excited, it was actually Karasu who spoke back to Ego. However, he is not confronting him, but rather he is asking what must be done. He tells him, but Ego, it's a fact that the way we are right now is not working effectively, right? What are we supposed to do? And Ego say, yeah. Well, if you are seeking something new, first you must throw away something old. And for that reason, I am discarding the tactics centered around Isagi Yoichi. From now on, we are going to go with this, because I am announcing the second half formation for our counterattack. And there we all know it's going to be Baro and Shido. However, Ego is one hell of a motherfucker, and so there is a third substitute in the mix. However, before we actually know that, we jump to the French side. And there for the first time we see their coach, who is a bald guy with a beard. And I don't know, he seems very French. If you know the stereotypical French look, he really looks French. The nose, the eyes, the beard, everything about him screams France. It's exactly how Onazi really looked Nigerian. And I honestly love this about Blue Lock. Its diversity is so naturally employed, it honestly is amazing. Because if you compare this to other anime, for example Kuroko no Basket, you couldn't tell the difference between Kissy and Nash. However, with Blue Lock, Nomura is really pulling his A game. In any case, however, I'm not going to read everything that happened in the few panels where we are seeing things from the French team's perspective, because all the coach did was meet right this team. He tells them that you are an anomaly and you should dominate because a team like this doesn't happen in 100 years. However, what was interesting is that as the coach was sucking the Ochinchin of the players, Hugo was completely ignoring him and he was reading a book. And I gotta say, this is super funny. It seems that Hugo might be the real coach of the team here. Kinda like how Snuffy when he plays, even though for any given team he plays with a coach, it is him who dictates the patterns. However, believe me when I tell you guys, you see everything that Ego said? Well, Hugo simply predicted that. Hugo actually foresaw what Japan is about to do, because as Charles was heading to the stadium, Loki calls for him and tells him, "Hey Charles, please stop playing around and stay in your designated warm-up spot." And this honestly sent shivers down my spine. You mean to tell me all of the shit Japan went through was just a warm-up to France? The fact that Rin and Isagi are drenched in sweat while France is warming up is honestly just insane. And honestly, this could explain why Loki did not do anything substantial as of yet, because he simply doesn't care. In any case, however, he carries on telling Charles, "When we are done with the warm-up, the earth will be grieving, right?" And this immediately sets fire to Charles, because it means towards the end we are going to see the real Loki, the one that we've seen in the NEL. And of course, Charles immediately jumps on the fun and he tells him, "Loki, you are such a greedy son of a bitch. I'll serve you up something real nasty just for this ego." And I love this dynamics, man. They know they are OP, they know they are going to destroy Japan, and so what they are going to do is just live it to the best. However, as if Hugo needed more feats to prove that he is the smartest motherfucker after Snuffy, he comes and he holds both Charles and Loki. And before I tell you what he says, I gotta say that the guy is so tall that Loki seems like a lost child next to him. He puts his hands around them and he swallows them both. Like, the guy is so beefy and so tall, it's not even funny. But what he says is actually more dangerous with him, because he takes one look at the field and he tells them, "It's okay, Loki, the match probably isn't going to end just like this anyways, because things are going to get wild." Blue Lock seems to have chosen that kind of fate. He takes one look at Barrow, he takes one look at Cheeto and the mystery third player, and he immediately knows this shit is going to go crazy. He immediately knows rationality is about to be tested. And of course, we know that he's seen Cheeto and Barrow play before, because he is like Karasu and Isagi and he likes to study his opponents. However, for him to immediately know it from just one glance is just insane, man. In any case, however, next we get the coolest panel in the chapter, which is a full spread of the 3 players that joined. Of course, Barrow and Cheeto, and Kunigami of all people. And I am so excited for this, because I have suspected that they might need a way to at least limit Hugo, and Kunigami is the best player for that. Kunigami himself is restriction, and so the more Hugo puts restriction on him, the better he performs. However, my boys Barrow and Cheeto are excited. Cheeto immediately says, "Let's go, let's fucking go, every cell in my body is buzzing." And Barrow in a very calm way says this, "It's hunting time." Of course, the guy with the best predator eyes is about to hunt. However, Kunigami actually said something very interesting. "You two drowning beasts are about to be tamed." And I'm like, what? They are on your side, what the hell you're talking about? And well, what Kunigami is referring to here is actually the same what Raichi was for both Isagi and Kaiser back in the Uber and PXG games, where he was the anchor between the two demons. And so I feel like Kunigami will have the double duty. He will of course try to limit Hugo's plays, but at the same time he will be an anchor for the team, much like how Karasu was for Chaz and Cheeto, and how, as I said, Raichi was for Isagi and Kaiser. And I understand Karasu could do it as well, but I feel like the Crow already has a lot on his plate, and so subbing Kunigami to be next to him is just perfect. In fact, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the next panel, which shows the new formation. We have Rin at the center as the sole striker, Cheeto and Barrow are wings, Cheeto on the right and Barrow on the left. The cam is ironically Isagi, which means even though Ego said all that shit about Hugo's philosophy, he ended up following what the latter was saying, and Isagi is officially a cam. Then we have 2 defensive midfielders, which are of course Kunigami and Karasu. For the back wings, of course Hiyori did not change, but in place of Chigiri you have Ryo. And this makes sense because Ryo is just versatile and could work anywhere. And for the center backs we have both Aiko and Aryu. However, let's actually talk about the substitutes here. Now Bachira, I totally get it, and everyone expected him to be subbed out. Chigiri is kinda iffy, but I don't know why Nico. Nico was one of the few players who had important feats in the game. I don't know why he was subbed out. I feel like he always gets the short end of the stick for some reason, and it's kinda getting annoying, but at the same time we are used to it at this point. He always gets shafted no matter the game, no matter the setting. However, it gets a little bit more interesting with Bajira and Chigiri. You see both love Isagi a lot, and they are key players in the Isagi-centered system, and so it kinda makes sense why they get subbed out, especially Bajira who got completely countered. However, I am a little bit iffy with Chigiri because he's the only one who could do something against Loki and his speed. Granted, in the previous chapter we've seen that Rin is very capable of stopping Loki one-on-one, and Karasu was able to keep up with him by just perfectly positioning himself, which by the way is an insane feat and takes Karasu very high, guys. And so I kinda get why Chigiri is not that crucial, but at the same time it doesn't hurt to have someone who could keep up at least a little bit with Loki. However, these are the substitutes, and to be honest, I'm just excited to see both Shido and Barrow in play, and so I really do not care. Even if I don't like it that Nico got subbed out, I don't give a shit. In fact, on a more important note, let's talk about everyone's favorite cam. Let's talk about Isagi, who actually ended up doing exactly what I suspected. He did not give up or get discouraged by Hugo. In fact, it only fueled his fire, because as he was getting to the center of the field, he says to himself, "A formation fully committed to destructive power. The system centered around me has been dismantled." That's what they were aiming for. And now we've got this new formation. Then he glances at Hugo and he thinks to himself, right there stands a human whose talent, dreams, and perspective are clearly on a whole different scale than mine. which by the way is crazy because Isagi is officially on the new Gen 11's level. He is equal to the likes of Kaiser and Lorenzo. And so to have Hugo on a different scale is just absurd and shows why it is correct to consider him on Loki's level. The situation is pure desperate adversity. So why? Why is my excitement accelerating? It's telling me to surpass this guy, to surpass Hugo. My ego is calling out. And I'll tell you guys why this is happening with Isagi right now. However, let's finish the chapter with the final panel, where it actually ends with the following statement. The more he is backed into a corner, the more Isagi Yoichi's blood boils. His glittering fighting spirit clashes with destiny, and we get this cool shot of Isagi on the top, Hugo on the bottom, and the stadium in the middle. And Hugo there activates his special eyes. However, let's get back to Isagi and why he is excited and why he would actually do something here. You see what Baro and Shido are. By their nature are chaos creators, and so their mere existence would take a lot of restriction from Isagi's back, and thus he will finally be able to perform against France and Hugo. Granted, Hugo does not seem to be scared one bit, but at least I feel like they could do something here. However, I gotta say guys, this chapter has been 10 on 10. Like, this game is immediately my favorite game in the entirety of Blue Lock. Like, even the PXG game, which I love to no end. Even the U20 game, which was all about hype, they do not stand a chance to this game. It just has that feeling about it, like that insane level we are operating at, and I just love it, man. And of course, it's all thanks to one player, which is Hugo. However, what do you guys think about his philosophy clash with egos, and whether they are both correct, but there is a compromise that is actually better than both, or there is a definite loser between the two? Please let me know what do you think about this, and what do you think about this insane chapter overall. However, that's all I've got for you today guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.